Okay, folks, welcome back to Battle for Azeroth. Wanted to do a state of for Demonology. Been playing Demonology for a little while now. I switched over when I was leveling and have been mostly doing PvP. I've done a couple other things, so I feel like I've got some, with the exception of raiding, I feel like I've got somewhat of an idea how it plays in different different situations. And I have played around with the talents, and long story short, it really didn't seem to matter what I did with the talents. I got about the same, did about the same DPS. So, yeah, so there you go, folks. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching. It's rare that I play all three specs of a class. Warlock is kind of the exception to that kind of. It's kind of a special class for a variety of reasons for me. So, I played early on when I started. I played Demonology, and I couldn't even tell you. I don't really even remember. And then I did nothing with it. Absolutely nothing with it for years and years and years. And then when I made I remember kind of logging in at different points to look at it. I remember when you had to, I vaguely seem to remember, generate some kind of a resource and you could become a demon and all of that. And it just didn't interest me. Looking at the spec, looking at different things, and I don't think I was PvP. I don't think I was playing PvP that much. PvPing that much. So I wouldn't have necessarily switched over to anything else. And at that time, that was the only way you got a fail guard, if I remember correctly. Now I think Destruction can summon the fail guard too, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not entirely sure. I thought it was a... Yeah, maybe it's a talent. I don't specifically remember, because I play mostly Affliction on this character, because I mostly do PvP. At any rate, the big thing was the fail guard. So, yeah, like I said, I was just kind of wanted to play around, and I will say this: it's a fun spec to play. It's not necessarily a PvP spec. I didn't see any other Demonology Warlocks. Most of them were somewhat surprisingly Destruction. Affliction was always kind of the go-to PvP spec, at least for the last few expansions. That's what I was playing before I switched over. So as far as I know, there's nothing wrong with it. They haven't made any changes that have nerfed it to some unplayable state, as does happen from time to time. I did the intro quest to Najar, and it seemed to do really well questing. In no small part due to Failguard, I'm sure, which acts kind of as a pseudo tank / DPS demon. So I actually did better in the intro playing as Demonology than I did on some other characters I'm more familiar with playing. So yeah, had had quite a bit of fun. Like I said, it's a really fun spec to play. That said, as far as the abilities, I honestly wouldn't have a clue. Most everything I remember is still here. I don't remember. Hand of Gul'dan, I don't remember from back in the day. I may just not have been high enough level to get this. I remember like your level 85 talent and different things were like you generally like your better talents. Those were kind of your I think they kind of functioned somewhat like the end of your talent tree. You know, you got you got kind of your big ability, your worthwhile ability after putting all this work into to level your character. But I really don't remember this. I don't remember wanting to level for this. I don't remember this at all. And I was trying to remember exactly when it would have been. I think it would have been like end of Mist of Pandora, beginning of Warlords, maybe? When I really remember kind of actually taking a closer look at Demonology. Implosion, fairly certain is new. This is kind of a weird ability because it has somewhat of a hidden mechanic that you don't necessarily realize, which we'll get into more as we go over the talents, because it's more it's a little more talent based. Your mastery just increases the damage your demons do. So took me a minute to kind of figure out the whole wild imps thing. And I remember when I looked at it before that like every time you would do damage, you would spawn a wild imp. Because I remember there were people running around looking like a demon version of Illidan with all these imps following them around. It got a bit to the point like it was where it was ridiculous. Demon Tyrant is new. This would be one of the more recent abilities. Just basically increases the damage that your demons and your damage, right? Your current. Oh no, I guess just the damage of your demons. Yes, and then from what I can tell, it does the damage itself. At least it looks like it does. The animation, anyway, looks like it does. Hand of Gul'dan does damage. This is going to be one of your AoEs. You have a little bit of everything. Warlock was always one of those odd classes because they had channeled abilities. You either had Drain Life or Drain Soul. At one time, you had both. You have some instant cast spells, you have some damage over time, you have some AoE, some single target. I mean, you have a good mismatch of everything. That's one reason why I think I enjoyed playing it so much, because you're not just kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again. Some specs can kind of get in their own way when they're really trying hard to push a theme. And with Demonology, you really didn't have that. You just kind of played, and you could kind of you were kind of doing enough different things that it wasn't getting stale. It wasn't getting boring. Hand of Gul'dan is your AoE. As I said, you do Shadow Flame damage. Not really sure, since we don't have resistances in the game anymore. That really matters too much. There are a few abilities that say shadow damage. So I'm not sure if shadow flame damage counts towards that. That's really the only thing that I could see shadow flame damage might matter. But you do AoE damage to the primary target and enemies within 8 yards. So not a great distance, but for PvP in skirmishes you might have at a base or trying to get a flag or something, that 8 yards is perfectly fine. And then summons 3 imps. So that implosion will stack up. I've had about 7 or 8 has been the highest I've seen this go. It will just basically throw all your imps to that target and turn them into AoE damage, basically. So, yeah. They made Shadow Fury a baseline ability. This used to be a talent, at least from what I remember from when I started playing Warlock. What it was before that, I'm not entirely sure. And then, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You really don't have a lot of passives, per se. Soul Link used to be a talent, I'm pretty sure. It seems like when I first started playing Destruction, I'm pretty sure this was a talent. Don't hold me to that. I may be mistaken. But yeah, and I'm pretty sure Demonology was either Demonology or Affliction. Used to have the soul shards that would be above your head. They don't do that anymore on either spec. I think it was Affliction though, if I remember correctly. I think you could still get a glyph for it, but just to make that. Yeah, just to kind of make that note. Kind of in the same way that a Frost Mage might have icicles above their head. It was very similar to that. And yeah, Demon Bolt is new. This was a talent in Warlord, as I remember. Now it's baseline ability, or there was a similar ability, let me put it that way. I don't know that it was specifically Demon Bolt, but it had a very similar effect if it wasn't. This is just your big, kind of the Warlock version of Pyroblast, basically. It's just your big damage slow cast spell, so which does have a chance to proc. Call Dreadstalkers is new. This just allows you to summon 2 Dreadstalkers to attack the target. Nothing too special there. Yeah, and I think if I didn't remember anything, that's it. If they removed anything, I think it would be like Drain Soul. I'm pretty sure all 3 specs had Drain Life and Drain Soul, because Drain Life, of course, restored health, and then Drain Soul, if I remember correctly, restored mana. Now, I think on Affliction, it restores life instead, if I remember correctly. Again, don't hold me to that, I could be mistaken. It's been a minute since I've played Affliction. And they've made some, when they did the stat squish and everything, I think they made some changes to it, if I remember correctly. Because I remember thinking it didn't work quite the same. So, for the most part, I stuck with the Felguard. Just because a lot of the spec is set up around you using Felguard, and its ability, Axe Toss, stuns the target for 4 seconds. So it's actually a pretty good ability to have in PvP. The Succubus has a disorientation ability for 30 seconds, I believe 20-30 seconds. However, damage can break the effect. So, not the best of abilities. And the Felguard seem to help with my DPS quite a bit, which makes sense considering what it does. It does have a well, Failstorm, which is essentially like the Warrior's Blade Storm. So, yeah. So, as I said, I tried a couple different versions of setting the talents up, and I did about the same damage regardless. This was probably the better, for purposes of discussion, the better setup that I have. I wasn't using Drain Life. I had Shadow Bolt where Drain Life is, and I was using Doom. That was kind of my original setup. And then I just kind of started playing around with different abilities, just kind of looking at the different talents. The talents are 2/3 of them are basically for your damage. They either affect your shadow damage or your shadow flame damage, or something one of your demons do. And then 1/3 of them, give or take, affect how your Failguard does. So, I saw one other Demonology Warlock, and when I looked over their talents, we had almost picked the exact same thing, both for talents and PvP talents. There were just a few differences. They tended to prefer more of the Failguard talents, where I went with more of just the general overall kind of DPS talents. So, and we were fairly close in damage. So we were right there together. So it kind of reassured me that I was at least on the right track for picking talents. I seem to be doing, compared to the other two specs, I seem to be doing lower DPS, and I thought maybe it was the talent, and I was playing with the talents, and I thought maybe it was the gear. I'm almost, I think my item level's like 397, so I'm almost level 400. So if by that point you haven't kind of figured things out, I really just think it's partially the spec. From what I've seen, nothing I seem to switch around really made much of a difference. I did about the same DPS regardless of what I did, almost exactly the same. As I said, I did about I did probably my best DPS with this setup. So originally I had taken Dreadlash, which affects your Dread Stalkers, and kind of gives them a little bit of an AoE ability, I think. Yeah, gives them kind of an AoE ability. And when I first switched over to Demonology, I was doing Time Walking. And I was trying to remember. I think it was Wrath of the Lich King. So there were some dungeons that were heavy on trash. So I was looking for more of a just kind of AoE. Hand of Gul'dan uses Soul Shards. Everything pretty well uses Soul Shard, or in the case of Implosion, it uses Imps. If you don't have Hand of Gul'dan, you have no AoE ability, really. So I started kind of playing around with the different talents, and I originally took Nether Portal, which just I did not like, and it just did not seem to work well. So I was looking through the talents again and switched to Bale Scourge Bombers, which works fantastically. You just put it at the target location, and then it just keeps summoning Bale Scourge, basically. Kind of look like the manatees from Argus a little bit. yeah, this has no, as long as it's off, cooldown only has a 30-second cooldown, costs 2 soul shards, which is not, if I summon, or if I use Demon Bolt, I have two soul shards, or if I use Shadow Bolt twice, I have 2 soul shards. So the cost is relatively low, the cooldown is low, and one-on-one, the main thing that makes this not ideal for PvP is one-on-one you really don't do well. With Affliction, I can kind of go one-on-one depending on the other class. Destruction is just more kind of your general overall spec. So again, just kind of depends on the class that you're trying to go one-on-one with. Um, with Demonology, it's really more of a stationary spec from what I from what I have experienced. You really don't have a lot of instant cast spells. You either have channeled abilities or things with a cast time. The fights where I was able to be more stationary and just keep kind of running through a rotation, you do have a lot of procs and different things like that. I of course did my better DPS. Of course, that could be said for any spec, but it really seemed like I did better. The games where there was a lot of movement, which a lot of you could argue that a lot of PvP maps are essentially just high movement boss fights. Essentially, you're just constantly moving to do one thing or another. It just kind of varied. It was more on the low end. It wasn't. I still did okay, but it was, comparatively to what I had been doing, but it was just a little lower. So I could see this being a really good rate spec, potentially. Bearing in mind, I don't do much with rating at the moment. But if it worked anywhere like it did for questing and different things like that, you shouldn't have too much trouble in raiding, I wouldn't think. At least low-end raiding. Maybe Mythic or higher, you're going to need to switch over to Destruction or something to that effect. But, yeah, so Bale's Scourge Bombers worked perfectly fine. Immediately noticed... instantly noticed an increase to my DPS. Demonic Strength affects just makes your Fail Guard do a little more damage, basically. Oh, get back over there. Yeah, like I said, wasn't entirely sure that I was going to be using the Fail Guard. Didn't want to... I don't like tying my talents down to one demon when you have 5. You do kind of need to switch around from time to time, depending on the situation and what you're doing. So that's why I said I kind of kept that in mind, and then I thought, I might as well just stay with the Fail Guard. It didn't seem like it was a detriment. So, yeah, so really any 3 of these, depending on what you're doing, are good. I just wanted more AoE. I like things to be a little more balanced. I really didn't want to take another spell. However, between Hand of Gul'dan, which does not have a cooldown, you can spam this over and over again. So you can really put out a lot of DPS between the 2 of them. So you have kind of one bigger DPS or AoE ability that has a cooldown, and then one that doesn't. And then this is generating imps for implosion. So it all kind of works nicely together. You have some single target abilities if you need them, and you have some AoE abilities. So you have a little bit of flexibility there. As I said, I took Doom for the longest time. just so I had a spammable ability, and I somewhat reluctantly changed this. I tried Demonic Calling a few times, changing some of the other talents along with it. And I just couldn't... I just couldn't quite get things to line up how I was wanting. My DPS just didn't seem to be changing, so I kept thinking maybe I was doing something wrong. I don't know how well Doom works. It really doesn't synergize with anything else, other than just being a spammable ability. It does kind of help you generate a soul shard. However, it does have, a longer built-in delay before it does damage. It does have a chance to summon a Doom Guard, which it did do a few times, if it kills the target, which was kind of nice. However, I have other abilities that do that. Might be one of the other talents. I thought one of them had a chance to do the same thing. Maybe yeah. Inner Demons does the same thing. So, yeah, I switched over to Demonic Calling, which increases Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt's chance of making Deathstalkers cost 1 less shard and have no cast time. The cast time is kind of redundant because I use Master Summoner as a PvP talent. However, the reduced soul shard, you only have 5 soul shard spots. So, having the reduced soul shard is worth it kind of in and of itself. And I really don't know what to take without ending up with another ability. And I kind of already have enough abilities. So, this isn't ideal to use half of a passive ability. But I just kind of left it. This was kind of one of those tiers where I kind of wish the spells were maybe a little different or a little better. Power Siphon sacrifices 2 imps to give you a charge of Demonic Core. Demonic Core has kind of a different effect depending on what it does. When your Wild Imps expand all of their energy or are imploded, you have a 10% chance to absorb their life essence, granting you a stack of Demonic Core. When your summoned Deathstalkers fade away, you have a 100% chance to absorb their life essence, granting you a stack of Demonic Core. Demonic Core reduces the cast time of Demon Bolt by 100%, maximum of 4 stacks. So this is what I was saying with the, you have a lot of things to proc. Hand of Gul'dan can use 1 to 3 soul shards. Ideally, you want to use it with 3. Bale Scourge Bombers uses 2. Dreadstalkers uses 2. So that one soul shard can actually make a big difference in certain situations. So I didn't want another ability that used my imps. Quite frankly, I thought about taking Doom back in some fashion, just to see if it really made a difference. I've been playing around with Drain Life. I took Essence of Drain. Whenever you heal with Drain Life, the enemy target deals 5% reduced damage to you for 6 seconds, stacks up 5 times. I don't use Drain Life nearly as much as you would think. One, because it's a channeled ability, and 2, because it... Typically, channeled abilities do have a pretty high cost to them, so I don't want to run out of mana. I have no way of regenerating mana. I don't have mana tap. as a demonology. So, yeah, I could potentially change this back. I'm still kind of on the fence about it because it really doesn't fit in with demonology like maybe you would think. So it's not a bad ability. It's if anything, it's a very classic Warlock ability. It just didn't, for PvPs, a quicker pace than what Doom allows, I think would be a good way to explain it. So, as I said, Demonic Call is not great because I'm only using kind of half the effect with the no cast time. I'm not quite getting the full benefit there, but the Soul Shard is more than worth it. I could take Soul Conductor, which would potentially have a chance to do the same thing. However, there's other talents here that I would prefer to have. So it kind of does double duty when you think about it in that way. So the next tier is basically just a utility choice, personal choice. Demon Skin, your Soul Leech absorption now passively recharges at a rate of 0.5% of maximum health every 1 second and may now absorb up to 15% of maximum health. So Soul Leech, there we go. All single target damage done by you and your minions grant you and your pet a shadowy shield that absorb 8% of the damage dealt up to 50% of maximum health. So there you go. So kind of nice. You are a clothy, so having a little bit of extra benefit. Burning Rush increases your movement speed, but does damage to your health. So that's not... It's a fun ability, but it's not terribly useful. Dark Pack sacrifices your current health to shield you for 250% of the sacrificed health for 20 seconds, usable while suffering from control impairing effects. So, again, I typically don't like abilities that have a negative effect on your health, even if you are granted another ability. I can with the
I require a target.
with the procs from Demon Bolt, I can do enough damage that Demon Skin works fine. I really don't have any complaints there. I may have been mistaken. It may have been Soul Leech that was a talent. Maybe Soul Link wasn't. Now I'm not so sure. I'm kind of confused. Anyway, so yeah, just kind of a utility. As I said, this is one of the abilities that I've seen other Warlocks take. It's kind of the default ability, unless for some reason you really want Burning Rush. That is one thing I will say overall, specifically for Demonology, though. You do lack any kind of speed increase. You do kind of make up for it because you have other, you do have Demonic Circle, you do have Demonic Gateway, different things like that. I'm bad about using Demonic Gateway. I do use Demonic Circle quite a bit. Just so I can get out of the way of damage, potentially, depending on the map, on the battleground. Yeah, so I think I've used all these with the exception of Dark Pack, and I think I used that when I first started playing. I think I played around with it. And as I said, abilities that have a negative effect on your health, I typically don't care for. So, Demon Skin works works well. And then the next tier, now this is one I kind of played around with. This is one where you can either go for just kind of overall DPS or for enhancing your Felguard. I've had from the Shadows, which causes your Dreadstalkers to deal an additional damage. It causes the target to take additional damage from your other abilities. This was kind of when I said it says 20% additional Shadow Flame damage. So when I had Doom, Doom just does shadow damage. So I'm not entirely sure if it counts for that. But most everything else I'm pretty sure does... well, no. Shadow Bolt does shadow damage, of course. Shadow Flame... Shadow Flame, and Shadow damage. So, yeah. Not entirely sure how the game, if that's just a, wording thing, kind of an issue, and it does count, or if I'm just overthinking it. It's kind of on the fence of kind of theory crafting slash, did they just not word it correctly? Are you supposed to know this? The other one I played around with was Soul Strike, which is a command your Felguard to strike into the soul of its enemy, dealing X amount of shadow damage. So, not a bad ability. It just doesn't do much if your Felguard gets killed, or oftentimes in PvP, for anybody who's ever played a pet class, your pet tends to wander off, and you end up running somewhere else, and you completely lose them. If the target doesn't die for whatever reason. That does happen a few times if you are out of range. It does have a 50-yard range, which is pretty long. It's one of the longer. Most abilities only have a 40-yard range at most. Yeah, it wasn't a bad ability. It just, again, just didn't really, I didn't want to tie one specific ability down to a pet class. It was a little too much like a hunter, honestly. Too much like a hunter with like kill command. If you, for whatever reason, didn't have a pet out, or your pet died, or what have you, you're sitting there hitting an ability that's not doing anything. So, From the Shadows does well enough. You're spending 2 soul shards to summon 2 Dreadstalkers, so this is kind of where a bulk of your ability comes from. And you can use this, as far as I know, it does have a cooldown. So you shouldn't ever have any more than 2, but it will proc back to back. So as long as you have the soul shards to use it and it's off cooldown, you can use it. You don't have to worry about having something summoned. Some abilities are weird like that. Yeah, so I pretty well try to keep this on cooldown when I can. And all you have to do is target the, as long as you have something targeted, they'll just go straight to that. So you don't have to summon something and then attack it for them to run in and do damage. So the other one, Summon Veil Fiend, just summons an additional demon to fight for you. Didn't really feel this was necessary. At least in PvP, this again might be a good if you were questing, or I really don't have, other than the Demonic Tyrant, I really don't have like a big cooldown per se. You're just kind of continuously running through your rotation to generate soul shards or imps or what have you. So yeah, I like that it's here. I like you have the option. I just didn't feel it was necessary. So I kind of excluded this and was just focusing more on Soul Strike and From the Shadows. And From the Shadows just seemed like, again, passive ability that makes an ability I already have better. So, and then again, you have another tier, kind of just a utility effect. As I said, I use Demonic Circle quite a bit, so this was kind of a no-brainer for me. This was my default here. Mortal Coil, it can be good. From time to time, I will have a few Warlocks use this on me. You don't see it nearly as much as you used to. I believe it used to be where Power Siphon was, I think, or Demonic Strength. I know it was in the middle, in one of these higher tiers here. Incapacitates the target for 3 seconds and heals you. So not bad, a little bit limited in PvP. It does have a longer cooldown. I think maybe that's why I didn't like it. There was something I was trying to think. I used it and I didn't like it, and it might have been the cooldown if I had to make a guess. Yeah. And then Dark Fury just reduces the cooldown on Shadow Fury by 15 seconds. Don't really use Shadow Fury, so yeah, I just don't ever, I have a hard enough time trying to get to use my other abilities without getting killed. So Shadow Fury, I try to use Fear, and we're kind of at a point in the game where people look out for Fear now, so you get interrupted quite quickly. A lot of Warlocks just weren't using it. I was quite surprised in some of the games I've played as of late. They weren't using it on me. I wasn't really using it on them. I kind of used it here and there in more kind of, 2v1, 3v2 kind of situations to try to, CC it a little bit to maybe get an edge. But other than that, not, does it, yeah, it does break from damage potentially, so I think that might partially be a reason why. There were a few times though. It just kind of depends on the game. The game and the map. I think certain maps people are more inclined to use crowd control than others for either the sportsmanship of it or just the fun of it. Yeah, so either any of these three potentially. I think they're more so than the level 45 tier. I think these are a little bit more situational depending on what you are trying to do. Demonic Circle just has more benefit in PvP for me. I can just set it and just to have a little more mobility, be a little more flexible depending on what I'm doing. I don't guard bases or anything like that as I might with Affliction or something else, because I'm not, as I said, I'm not good with kind of one-on-one matches. If I get stunned, I'm basically dead. I can try to stun them with the fail guard, or I can trinket and try to do something, but it typically doesn't go well. I've tried more times than I care to admit. You just don't have much that you can cast and move or cast quickly. So, and then the next tier here, I took Inner Demons. Now this is where it gets a bit odd. You passively summon 2 wild imps and then have a chance to summon an additional demon to fight for you. So again, seen a lot of Warlocks take this ability. When I've seen a Demonology Warlock around. it just seemed like it made a little more sense with Implosion. You don't have to take this. I think normally I would have taken Soul Conductor. Yeah, this way I always have 2 Wild Imps to use Implosion. Typically, if I use Hand of Gul'dan, I'll average about 4. As I said, I think I've seen it go as high as 7 or 8, depending if I'm able to use Hand of Gul'dan like back to back, because this will automatically summon 3. And for one reason, they're very fragile. They don't last very long, as I'm sure you might have noticed down here. And it does summon an additional demon quite often. Not frequently. I would say it's probably a good 10% chance, but enough. More so, this is one of those percentages that, and again, it might be a wording issue. It happens more often in like group fights, if that makes sense. If I'm just running in and trying to aid somebody else in trying to like kill a healer or something, maybe not as much. But if I'm doing a fight over more of a skirmish over a base or a flag or something, and I'm able to again, just kind of be stationary, or like Temple of Komaku, however you pronounce that. The one with the orbs. If you're in mid and you're able to kind of keep control of mid, that's where I typically notice the extra demon. So the bigger, longer fights, you have a higher percent of getting that extra demon. Otherwise, it just passively summons 2 Wild Imps, which I kind of went back and forth with this, whether it was worth it or whether I should try to take Soul Conduct to get the 15% chance to get a Soul Shard refunded. I think the Wild Imps, though, are just worth it. They do 2,500 damage, 2,500 AoE damage. So, and that amount increases based on the amount of imps you have. So, yeah, I've done some pretty decent AoE damage. It's at least a fun ability to use if you haven't ever seen it used. Like I said, it's not a great spec for PvP. I don't know. When I did again, didn't notice much in time walking. When I did the intro quest to Najjar, I didn't really seem to have much trouble with anything. So, and some of those mobs and different things gave me quite a time on different characters. I've only done it a handful of times. But I remember on my mage, I kind of struggled a little bit here and there. Admittedly, my mage is not well geared. I was better geared. Having done time walking before that, I had a little better gear. Still wasn't great. I was well below 300 item level when I hit 120. So it's just been doing a lot of PvP. Has got from like the lower 300s up to almost 400 now. Like I said, I think I'm like 397. Then you have Grimoire Failguard. Summons a Failguard who attacks the target for 15 seconds and deals 25% increased damage. This Feral Guard will stun their target when summoned. So, this one kind of confused me, admittedly, because it leads me to believe it summons a second Failguard. Which is okay, but again I question, is there really much benefit in that? Implosion is one of the only instant cast abilities I have. So if you can get Hand of Gul'dan, if you can cast that, you can move while using Imp Implosion, unless you have Dreadstalkers, excuse me. So, yeah, I thought about this, because it does stun, which would be good in PvP. I just couldn't really see the practicality of it. I don't need 2 of them. As odd as that might sound, on a 2-minute cooldown. If it had a 1-minute cooldown, or even like 1.3, 1.5, something else, or some way to reduce the cooldown or something, maybe. I just kind of with Doom, how I was reluctant to change it. I kind of went back and forth on this, going, am I overthinking the imps? And I kind of came to the conclusion, no, I don't think you are, because this is kind of, like I said, this is what I was getting at earlier. This kind of has a whole hidden mechanic that you don't realize. Because if you don't have imps, this doesn't do anything. If I didn't have imps now, if I was to switch over, it does nothing. So at least with inner demons, this is staying active. 1 or 2 imps admittedly isn't great. However, there were a lot of games where players were just on the edge of dying. And then, since we have lower health pools now, they were able just to heal right back up. So having a little bit of damage isn't a terrible thing, even if it's not the optimal damage you could do with the ability. Like I said, they are kind of fickle, they do die quick. But just being able to do some AoE damage. And you can use Hand of Gul'dan over and over again as long as you have the soul shards. So, and that is the one nice thing about it, is it does use 1 to 3. So, as long as you keep generating soul shards, it's not like you have to use 3 and you have 5, so you have to generate 1 somewhere to use it a second time. No. It may not do the exact same amount of damage, but it will summon 3 imps each time. So you do have kind of the multi effect of it, if that makes sense. And then the last tier, and this is probably the most disappointing one of all of these, because they all tend to kind of work together rather nicely. Sacrifice Souls, Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt deal 4% additional damage per demon you have summoned. Now, I noticed when I had Doom, I wasn't using Shadow Bolt. I would just spam Doom, and then I would try to cast Demon Bolt. Now that I swapped out Doom, I tend to find I use Shadow Bolt a little more. It does have a lower cast time, quicker cast time. So you can generate, you can typically get the Demonic Core just to give you instant cast Demon Bolts fairly quickly. It was Demonic Core, right? Yes. Reduces the cast time of Demon Bolt, yes. So yeah, it does kind of work better, but now I'm noticing I'm not using Drain Life. So I was kind of wondering if it wasn't better just to take Doom back. As I said, I tried using Nether Portal first before I went with Bale Scourge Bombers. And the problem with this, tear open a portal to the Twisting Nether for 15 seconds. Okay. Every time you spend soul shards, you will also command demons from the nether to come out and fight for you. The problem with that is every time you spend soul shards, you kind of have to set up for this and then spend all of your soul shards almost immediately. It says it lasts for 15 seconds. it sure didn't seem like it lasted for 15 seconds. I tried on several time walking dungeons to use this, and I just didn't like it. It wasn't just the coordination ability. I just didn't like it. It works. It works in a it doesn't work in a common way you're used to with certain abilities. When I use Balescourge Banshees, it kind of does this whole opening, or Balescourge Bombers, excuse me. It kind of does this whole animation thing, but it just starts doing damage. I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to worry about doing anything else. This, again, is more, I think, kind of a raid ability. And then with a 3-minute cooldown, by the time I started to set up for it again, it wasn't off cooldown yet. So, for a variety of reasons, I tried to use it and just decided to switch back. Demonic Consumption. Your demonic tyrant now destroys and absorbs the remaining power of all your wild imps to empower itself. So again, it doesn't specifically say that it does. To increase the duration of all your current lesser demons and increase the damage of all your other demons while damaging your target. So it says while damaging your target, but it doesn't really say anything else. So, and at first I wasn't even sure this was doing damage. So it just kind of stands there. It kind of makes an animation, but it just kind of stands there. You're not always sure if your certain abilities don't always explicitly explain what they do. So you're not sure if you're interpreting them correctly. So I assumed it did damage. It doesn't. I've used it a few times, and it doesn't seem to make a big deal of difference, honestly. Yeah, I mean, I can't say my DPS shot up. I can't say not using it was detrimental to my DPS. So it just kind of, when when I'm able to be a little more stationary, I will try to use it. Again, I'm just not sure how much, unless I'm just not summoning it at the opportune time. I've summoned it enough times, though, in enough different situations that I would think if it was going to have an effect, I would have been able to see it by now. I early on, I had a really bad habit of trying to do something the exact same way each time, and I wasn't understanding different abilities worked in different ways, so I have tried, and that's what I like about PvP, is that you're never in the exact same situation depending on the team you're against and who you're playing with and whatnot. So I'm all but sure if it was going to have a bigger impact, I would have been able to see it by now. So I couldn't really see where the benefit of this would come from. It's a really weird ability. I was gonna do a state of sooner, and then when I was kind of looking over everything, just kind of collecting my thoughts, I thought, well, I really haven't used this a lot. I should be able to, because it's about the only cooldown you have as a Demonology Warlock. I said, I really should play with this more to see if there's something I'm missing. Because it seemed like my DPS was low compared to Affliction or something else. Affliction kind of makes sense because you have a ton of dots. And AoE abilities and different things like that. It's more intended for PvP. And like I said, I've used it enough times. I'm not entirely sure, probably a handful of times on different games. I just can't see where it has much benefit, which is disappointing. Again, it might be a better raid ability, or maybe if you're trying to do like mythic dungeons or something and you just needed a little bit of a boost to finish off the last boss or something like that, it makes a little more sense. Other than that, if it gave your demons maybe increased the if it helped increase maybe their damage reduction, or if it increased their health or something, maybe it would make a little more sense. That's still maybe the only spell I really need to play with more to figure out exactly what it does. Because as far as I can tell, it works similar to how I think it was the Doom Guard worked, where you would summon it and it would just cast shadow bolts at your target. Essentially, that's all it does. It just stands there and does damage. So I'm not entirely sure what damage it's doing. I don't know if it's doing shadow damage, shadow flame damage. I don't know if from the shadows is benefiting it. And then it only lasts for it doesn't even say how long it lasts for. To increase the duration of all by well, it says 15 seconds, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't stay out for 15 seconds. To roll other abilities by 15%. Yeah. So, that one's kind of a strange ability. It's a nice fact. I like the concept of it. It's just kind of, at least in PvP, it's kind of a strange ability. So, Sacrifice Souls seemed like it works better. And the 4% based on how many demons you have summoned, that's going to vary. So having something that kind of scales with, your, depending on what you're doing and your situation is not a bad thing. So, yeah. So there you go, folks. I will say, I think Demonology has maybe one of the more, what's the word I'm looking for? More kind of versatile, flexible talents of the classes I've seen. You can. I like the fact that you can do the same thing with different talent, but it gives you a slightly different path to get there. So you're not exactly doing the same thing, like Demonic Calling and Soul Conduct. I like the idea of being refunded a Soul Shard, but I think Inner Demons is probably better here. Whereas Demonic Calling has a chance to essentially refund me, essentially does the same thing without realizing it. And this does proc quite a bit, again, in the bigger kind of skirmishes that you can get into in PvP. You'll get both of them that proc. So that one extra Soul Shard, as I said, for Hand of Gul'dan, for Imp Implosion, for even called Dreadstalkers. Bale Scourge Bombers. I think one reason why I think this works better from my experience is that it does only cost 2 Soul Shards. So it's not as though there's some classes I've played here and there where like everything costs the same amount. So your management gets ridiculous trying to figure out what to use, and you end up only using like a handful of abilities because you think, well, these are my better abilities. This is what I can generate. I'll use those kind of as I have to, or more kind of situational or situationally. So yeah. So there you go, folks. There is state of for demonology. As I said, probably it's a fun spec to play. Um, if you just wanted to do questing or just kind of wanted to mess around with dungeons or something, I would definitely say you'll probably enjoy yourself um, playing Demonology. So, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you found that helpful, and thank you for watching.